Aloha! I'd like to welcome you to your first WOD. Before we jump into doing Browser History 1, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how to do a WOD and make the most out of your experience. The first thing you need to do, of course, is to go to the WOD and read what you need to do to be prepared for it. In this case, for Browser History 1, it says you need to complete all the readings for the User Interface Basics module. And then it says, of course, you're supposed to open VS Code to your repo directory. This is going to be your class repository that you do all your work at. Open a terminal, start HTTP server, and then create a directory called WODs. We only need to do this once because we'll just use the same directory over and over for the next WODs. And then create another directory called Browser History 1, which will house all the files for this project, Browser History 1. When you first start a WOD, you should definitely read through the instructions and get an idea of what you're supposed to do to make sure you're properly set up. One thing says start a screen recorder and timer. So I assume that you already have a screen recorder in mind. I'm going to be using QuickTime Player. And then a timer if you're going to be recording the time that you have. And there's several screen recorders and timers that are offered that you could use under Athletic Software Development here. You'll see it gives a number of suggestions for timers like Online Stopwatch or Google Chrome Web Store. There's any number of different timers you can use. You also have different options for your screencasting. You can use whatever you like. I tend to use QuickTime Player on the Mac, but it's a little difficult to use. It's very basic. And then on Windows, I tend to use something called Flashback Express. But you might find some of these other ones more useful. Many people like this OBS Studio, which works on both Windows and Mac. Also Videoland. Make sure that you know how to use your screen recorder without any effort before you get started. You don't want that to get in the way. Your screen recorder also might have a timer on it, and if it does or allows you to view the timer, you won't necessarily need to have a timer that you can watch while you're doing it. I'm just going to open up this stopwatch. And actually, I'll open it up in another window here. And I'll get that ready to go. So here's my stopwatch. And I'm going to use a countdown timer. And you'll see why I'm going to use a countdown timer, because that will keep me from going over the did not finish. So here's Browser History 1. Browser History 1, we see that it has a recommended time or a prescription time of 15 minutes, an average time of 15 to 20 minutes, a standard time is 20 to 25 minutes, and a did not finish if you take longer than 25 minutes. So I'll set my countdown timer to be 25 minutes. If I don't finish it by the time the countdown timer goes, then I'll just stop and start again. So now what you want to do is read through the instructions and kind of get an idea of what you need to do to make sure you're all set up. So obviously I'm going to create a directory called WODs. I'm going to have another directory in there called Browser History 1. And it says create a file called index.html. And I'll probably do that all through VS Code. Make sure that's in your repo so that you can publish that later after you finish your WOD successfully. And then it says make the index file contain an HTML document whose title and top level section, use the H1 tag, is named a history of web browsers. If you're not familiar with your HTML tags, etc., that means you need to go back and do the UI Basics module readings again. Go through those tutorials on HTML and CSS. And then it says do an emit boilerplate and click on the browser and remember to see that you got your thing running and do a path to your index to see if it actually runs. It says structure the document into the 4 sections: introduction, brief history, etc., etc. And it says this link will take you to a text copy for each of the section. Be sure to preserve paragraphs. So I'll click over here and just take a look. Oh, and here's a bunch of text that I'm going to probably be using. And then it says create a link, and then just make an initial session table of contents, and finally 3 sections describing the browser and links to the logos. And looks like these things are logos that I can either download or I can link to. Okay. And it says the following image shows what it should look like at the end. So I'll click on this, and this looks like what I'm trying to go for. So I'm going to try to make a web page that says a history of browsers, a little table of contents with a list, and various sections with some images in it. Seems easy enough. Okay, I think I'm ready to get started. So before I get started, I'm going to do what I said before, which is I'm going to go to open up my repo. So I'll go to GitHub desktop, and I'll open up my repo. Mine's going to be ITN352 Fall 2020 repo. Yours might be different. And then I'm going to open it in Visual Studio Code. Move that aside. And now in my repo, I'm going to create a new directory called WODs. And in that directory, I'm going to create my first WOD directory, browser history 1. Okay, so in browser history 1, I think I'm ready to go. I'm set up with my project over here. I don't need my welcome anymore. And now I'm going to start my timer.